Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Stigma-Free Learning Live with the Stigma-Free Society. If you are new to this Facebook and YouTube live event that is hosted bi-weekly by SFS, hello, welcome. We're so excited to have you. My name is Samara Liberman. The gender pronouns that I use are she and her, and I am the host of this live event. If you're coming back to this live event, thank you for coming back. It's so great to have you here as well. We're always excited to have returning viewers. So this is a fairly new live event for Stigma-Free. So just to give you a bit of context on the event and on me and on Stigma-Free Society in general, if you are new here, we're going to kind of give you some context and some background. So with this live event, it's an opportunity for educators to get a bit of a deeper dive into some of the lesson plans and downloadable resources that are housed on the Student Mental Health Toolkit. So if you haven't checked out our toolkit yet, please go look at it. There's always new resources that are being put on there. We're in development with some brand new resources that are going to be coming up. There's lesson plans and downloadable resources that are uploaded every other week that are written by me. And it's a really exciting place. It's very interactive, and there's different sections for youth. There's sections for teens. There's also a section for parents and guardians, also for teachers and school counselors. So there's lots of information that's housed there. We cover topics about stigma of all kinds. We talk about mental health a great deal. We talk about equity issues. So if you're looking to implement some of those topics in your classrooms, I would highly recommend checking out our lesson plans. So just to give you a bit of background on me and kind of why I'm here and, what brought me to this live event. I am a programs manager with the Stigma-Free Society. I also have a bachelor's degree in equity studies and a master's in teaching and a professional development certification in early years mental health. So fusing all of my passions together, I have created some resources on the Student Mental Health Toolkit that really touch on all of those various aspects. And there's also that credibility of the fact that I have a teaching degree and I have a master's in teaching. So I'm bringing that to the table as well with these resources. So to give you a bit of background on the Stigma-Free Society in general, the Stigma-Free Society is a decade-old Canadian registered charity where we work to reduce and eliminate stigma of all kinds with a focus on mental health. So regardless of the topic that we're discussing, we always tie it back to mental health, as that is kind of the primary focus of our organization. So one of the ways that we work to reduce and eliminate stigma is through education. We firmly believe that education is one of the primary tools that we can use as people to build empathy and to reduce stigma, which ties perfectly into the lesson that we're going to be discussing today. So the lesson that we are going to be doing a deep dive into is the What is Empathy lesson plan that you can find on the Student Mental Health Toolkit in the Youth Corner for grades 4 to 7. So if you would like to follow along with the lesson today, that is where you will find it. And it covers the curriculum areas of both arts education as well as career education. As always, please feel free, I encourage you, please, to leave a comment on this video of ways that I can improve this live event. We can improve the lesson plans and downloadable resources in general, as well as the Student Mental Health Toolkit in general. We are always looking for feedback from educators or from people who are using this toolkit, because that's how we know what you want, know what you're going to use, know what you need, and we're really here to serve you and to create resources that are valuable. So please leave a comment and share some feedback. All feedback is welcome and well received. So to dive into the lesson plan for today, empathy is a word I think that's being used a lot more these days. I think there's definitely a more of an understanding in our society about, the importance of empathy and a growing awareness of the importance of empathy. So for young people, building empathy is a really important skill for them to effectively communicate in their interpersonal relationships. But it also can really greatly impact the way that they treat other people in general. So when we look at what kind of creates stigma, ultimately what it comes down to is a lack of understanding of somebody else's lived experience. So when someone doesn't look like us or talk like us or have the same values as us, it can be really hard to put yourself in their shoes. So building empathy as a skill is a really, really great way to kind of break down stigma or look at stigma or interrogate stigma and see that, even though we might not have the same experience as somebody else, it doesn't mean that we should be judging their experience or we should be creating that stigma around their experience. So like I said, building empathy is a really fantastic tool for overcoming stigma and to create larger social change. So helping your students see the importance of empathy in their everyday life is a great way to begin facilitating this journey for them in their interpersonal relationships, but also on a larger scale to, inspire them to create some social change. So the curriculum competencies in this lesson pull from both arts education and career education. So the arts education piece is really tied into the active component of this lesson. Your students are going to have the opportunity to do some dramatic acting, which is very exciting. I did a lot of drama and theater when I was in school, and I loved it. I felt like it was a really great way to explore my creativity and kind of put some ideas that I was learning in the classroom into action. And I always had a lot of fun with it. So I wanted to bring the dramatic arts into a lesson plan, and I thought this was a really great way to do it because, with acting, you are putting yourself in the role of another character and putting yourself into the shoes of another person. And that's really what empathy is. It's kind of just trying to see the world through somebody else's eyes. So I thought bringing the dramatic arts into this lesson was a really great way to also kind of facilitate that empathy building. So the career education component is really brought in the overall purpose of this lesson, which is, the development of empathy and the subject of empathy. So some of the curriculum connections here include identify and appreciate the personal attributes, skills, interests, and accomplishments, and their own growth over time, to recognize the need for others who can support their learning and personal growth, and to demonstrate respect for differences in the classroom. So I thought these curriculum connections really tied in perfectly with the conversation on empathy and kind of, learning how to treat others with respect and with empathy. So all of these curriculum connections really tie in perfectly with this conversation. So the first thing you're going to do is queue up the video that's in the lesson plan. And I really like this video. It's short and sweet, but I think it's a really great way to start this conversation because, they're seeing young people who might look like them, who might not look like them, or, people their own age kind of working through their own definitions of what empathy is. So I think it's a really great way to kind of start the dialogue with your students around what they think empathy is, how they would define it, what's important to them with being empathetic. So after you watch the video, you can, use some guiding questions to spark this conversation and to get your students to get them thinking more about how they would define empathy. So continuing to build on this conversation, have your students work in pairs to come up with a definition of empathy that they will then share with the class. So I think it's really great to work in pairs for this because, empathy might be a new word to some of your students. They might not have heard it before. So getting them to work with somebody else is a really great way to ensure that there's a level of understanding there and that they're co-creating these definitions with somebody else. So once they have had a sufficient amount of time to come up with a definition that works for both of the people in the pairing, they're going to have a chance to share their definition with the class. So as they are sharing their definitions, I would encourage you to write the definitions down on the board. Like with all of the lesson plans, I think anchoring these conversations by writing them down somewhere is a really great way to make sure that your students have a place that they can refer back to where they've already done some of this work, they've already done some of the learning, and they can kind of have a reference point for that. So next, I encourage you to get your students to brainstorm with you kind of collectively as a class some examples of empathy in action. So places where they've seen, people really exemplifying empathy. So this is going to be kind of what starts the active component of the lesson. So having them kind of, coming up with these ideas will get them kickstarting their thinking around what empathy looks like, examples of empathy that will really be imperative to the next part of the lesson, which is the active part of the lesson, which is the dramatic part of the lesson. So your students will, again, work in pairs. They can either work with the same person that they created the definition with, or you can kind of split them up and have them work with new people to do this part. But they're gonna create a dramatic scene that really exemplifies the concept of empathy. So this can be, one of the examples that they've already come up with, where it was like a real world example of when they've seen empathy in action. It can be kind of like a more fictitious example of empathy that they come up with on their own. And you can kind of let them play with this. So they can either write a script and have it kind of be something that they really pre-plan and memorize and then, perform with the class. Or they can kind of come up with more of like a skeleton of what they want this lesson, the dramatic scene to look like, and then kind of improvise it as they go along and kind of work with their partner in the scene to, come up with something exciting and cool. So once they've had time to put their scene together, they're going to have the opportunity to perform it to the class. If your students are feeling a little bit nervous about this, just remind them that this is just, it's supposed to be fun. It's really intended to, like I said, to really put them in the empathetic role. So you can explain to them that, in order to effectively do this work of building empathy, we do have to put ourselves in other people's shoes. And that's what acting is. So just remind them that doing this dramatic presentation, is kind of works very well with the idea of building empathy. So once they've had a chance to perform, you can, kind of pause after every performance and discuss with the rest of the class, like have everybody join in on a conversation around, what was the example of empathy that was brought into this conversation? How is empathy exemplified in the performance that they just saw? So I really like the opportunity to have your students learn from each other. I think wherever possible, it's really, really great to have your students present their learning to the class, because it's really important, I think, for them to learn from each other. I think as teachers, sometimes we end up kind of sitting in the role of the knower of all things. But it's really, really great for kids to see that they can learn from each other too. And I think facilitating that through this is a really great example of that for your class. And then, you can kind of talk through, what they did and how they did it and, kind of spark that conversation. So for the final piece of this lesson, I think it's a really great way to tie the conversation back into mental health. And empathy really connects well to the idea of mental health and reducing stigma that exists around mental health and mental illness. So, like I said, at the end of the lesson, for the lesson closure, you can facilitate a conversation with your students around how empathy is a really, really powerful tool for our relationships, but also for social change. When we foster empathy with others, we are creating a space for other people's needs and feelings based on their own experiences. This is something that can create stronger relationships in our lives as well as in the world at large. So this can greatly impact the mental health of the people that we interact with by showing them that their needs are important to us and we respect their needs and we respect their experiences. So that is it for this lesson plan. I'm so happy to have discussed it with you today. Like I said, I think talking about empathy and fostering empathy with our students is a really great way to build their interpersonal relationships that are strong and using effective communication, and to kind of get them inspired to do some more active work in terms of social change. And I think it's also a really great way to facilitate some community building in your class. So if things come up, if interpersonal issues among your students come up, you can remind them of this discussion of empathy to get them thinking about, like, was I being empathetic in this interaction with my peer in the classroom? Was I thinking about their needs? Was I being respectful of them? So like I said, I think it's a really great way to start that conversation with your students. So I am so grateful to have shared this lesson with you. I feel very passionate about this one. I think I'm a big believer and a big proponent of empathy and treating others with empathy and kindness. So I hope that you enjoyed this Stigma-Free Learning Live installment. We will be back not next week, but the week after with another live event. As always, I am your host, Samara Liberman, and please feel free to leave a comment or a question or, any feedback that you have is really, really helpful and really, really appreciated. So once again, thank you for tuning in, and we will see you